So when we talk about the imperialists, what does that mean? What does it mean when we talk about the imperialists? You know, a lot of people think that means people who believe in war a lot. No. People think that we mean military people who are really excited about military interventions, or people who want to go take over countries. They want to build an empire. Well, no, imperialism is an economic thing. It is an economic concept that comes out of Lenin. He wrote a book called Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, where he talked about how finance capital, bankers, move into a dominant position over industrial capital, and that the bankers sit at the center of networks of trusts, cartels, and syndicates, and that these ultra monopolies that don't just make profits, they make super profits by subjecting the developing countries of Africa and Asia and Latin America to super exploitation. These ultra monopolists, these ultra rich with their trusts, their cartels, their syndicates, these finance capitalists, they sit at the center of a global financial empire. And this global financial empire that they sit at the center of, this empire holds back economic development, prevents entire nations from lifting themselves up from poverty. It keeps countries impoverished as captive client states. It beats down entire countries. This is imperialism. This is Lenin's understanding of imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. Capitalism in its monopolistic stage, where governments and banks and cartels and monopolies, industrial monopolies in the Western countries team up into gigantic entities that beat down entire countries. We're talking about the World Bank. We're talking about the International Monetary Fund. We're talking about the World Trade Organization. We are talking about BlackRock. We're talking about Goldman Sachs. We are talking about ExxonMobil, BP, Shell, and Chevron, the ultra monopolies. That is who the imperialists are, and this global system where they sit at the center of it, driving down living standards, trying to keep the world poor so that they can stay rich. That is what imperialism is. It is capitalism in its monopoly stage, a global financial system that is about holding back human progress and keeping the world poor. That is what we are living under in this time. Capitalism in its monopoly stage, imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism. Go and read what Lenin wrote about it. You want examples of what imperialism is? Take a look at Nigeria. This is the country in Africa that has the highest oil exports. No country on the African continent exports more oil than Nigeria. But yet in Nigeria, there's massive malnutrition. There's massive illiteracy. They don't have a modern educational system. Most of the children there don't get to go to modern schools. The life expectancy is low. Why is a country in Africa with so much oil exporting more oil than any other country on the African continent? Why is it so wealthy but so poor? Because the oil of Nigeria is under the domination of ExxonMobil and BP and Shell and Chevron. The export of capital. We don't sell French fries. The United States doesn't export French fries, it exports McDonald's. We don't export oil, we export gigantic oil monopolies to take over the markets, of Nigeria. And the Nigerian people don't get wealthy from their own oil. It's ExxonMobil and BP and Shell and Chevron that get rich from it. Nigeria is a wealthy country with lots of oil, but the Nigerian people are impoverished. That's imperialism. You want to know what imperialism is? You can talk about how the fact that the people of Mexico have been growing their own food since long before Christopher Columbus ever showed up. Long before Christopher Columbus, the Aztecs, the Incas, the indigenous people, they were growing their own food. They were growing tomatoes. They were growing corn. They were growing tobacco. They were growing their own food. They know how to grow their own food. They don't need the white man to come and tell them how to grow their own food. They don't need the foreign occupier to come and teach them to grow their own food. They were growing their own food. But in the 1990s, they passed the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA. And that enabled the U.S. to subsidize agriculture. And American agribusiness was able to flood the Mexican market with cheap agricultural goods. The cost of food imported to the United States was cheaper than the food that you could buy locally in Mexico. And they put all the Mexican farmers out of business. And the Mexican farmers were put out of business in mass. And pretty soon, you had a situation like it is today where Mexico, a country that's been growing its own food for hundreds of years, for thousands of years, is now importing its food from the United States, from American agribusiness. American companies. American companies are at this point dominant in the food sector in Mexico. They used to have their own farms. And now they have to import their food and buy their food from Kraft and agribusiness corporations and Monsanto and other crooked ultra monopolies. And you look at all those people coming over the Mexican border, a lot of them used to have families that had farms. They used to work on farms. They used to work on Mexican farms. And now they've lost their farms and they're impoverished. This is imperialism. The ultra monopolies, the American agribusiness corporations destroyed the Mexican farming sector. Mexico was beaten down and absorbed and taken under the domination of the trusts, cartels, and syndicates, the giant corporations, the finance capitalists, the export of capital. Instead of exporting products, the U.S. imperialists exported Monsanto, and they exported Kraft, and they exported these huge companies. The export of capital took over the Mexican market, and now Mexico, a group of people, a country that has been importing or that has been growing their own food for thousands of years, now they're forced to import their food from the United States. That's imperialism. Imperialism is when the British Empire took control of India. In the 1800s, the people of India had been growing their own food. They had been weaving. They had beautiful looms that they've been weaving for thousands of years. When the British came to India, they burned the looms. The British capitalists, the British military, they poured oil on those looms and they lit them on fire. And they burned all the looms of Britain. And why did they burn them? They burned them because they were going to force the people of India to import all their cloth from the British textile mills, right? It was about keeping India as an impoverished client state of the British imperialists. That's what they were doing. We're going to read about Gandhi. What did Gandhi, we all are critical of Gandhi for a lot of different reasons, but what did Mahatma Gandhi get arrested for? Does anyone know what Mahatma Gandhi got arrested for? Mahatma Gandhi, what was his civil disobedience? He went to the ocean and he got salt water and he boiled it to make his own salt. And that was a crime in India. And why was it a crime for Mahatma Gandhi to boil his own salt from seawater? Because the salt markets were dominated by the British. And there was a law that India had to import all of its spices, all of its salt, all of its pepper, all of its spices had to be imported from British companies. And so by boiling salt water, he was undermining the British domination of India's economy. And that's why they arrested Gandhi for making his own salt. He was defying the imperialists. The British wanted to control the Indian markets, and he was standing up against it. That's what imperialism is. I mean, you want to talk about it, and we'll talk about Joe Rogan. We'll talk about that, John. I'm going to write down Joe Rogan. Joe Rogan. The British Empire. You want to talk about examples of imperialism? Go back to the Boston Tea Party. The Boston Tea Party was about imperialism. It was about the fact that the British wanted to secure a monopoly over the American markets. They wanted to dominate the market. They wanted to control the American markets, and they didn't want any competition. They wanted to have a monopoly on the products that they sold. And that Boston Tea Party that we all learn about in school, this great patriotic event, was about standing up to the domination of a foreign corporation. It was about saying, no, we want to develop our own tea industry. We want to have our own businesses. We don't want to be dominated by British corporations. So this is what imperialism is. And the countries around the world that have had the most success in fighting for their people and raising their people up from poverty are countries that have broken free from imperialism. The Chinese Communist Party kicked out the imperialists, and now China is the second largest economy in the world. The Soviet Union and Russia, they kicked out the imperialists and they defeated the Nazis and invented space travel and raised their people up and industrialized their countries. Prior to 2011, the highest life expectancy on the African continent was in Libya, where the people of Libya had kicked out the imperialists, and under the leadership of Gaddafi, the socialist leader, they had raised their people up from poverty. They had the highest life expectancy on the African continent. In the Caribbean, if you compare the living conditions in Haiti, you compare the living conditions in Jamaica, all the people in the islands of the Caribbean have nothing compared to what the Cuban people have. In Cuba, they have a literacy rate and a life expectancy and an infant mortality rate that's far better than most of the people throughout the Caribbean. Why? Because they kicked out the imperialists and they adopted socialism and they built their own economic system. In modern times, socialism is about opposing the imperialists. It's about standing up to the imperialists, and the job of revolutionaries in the Western countries, our job is to get the working people of the United States to understand that it is in their interest to team up with the people of the colonized world against the imperialists. That the future of the American working class is intrinsically tied up with the future of the people in Africa, in Asia, and in Latin America that are fighting for their national liberation against the imperialists. That the working class of the Western countries and the people of the colonized world have a common destiny and a common enemy, the imperialists. Unite against the imperialists. That is our job. And if you're calling yourself a socialist or calling yourself a Marxist or a revolutionary in the 21st century, what you should be doing is resisting and fighting the imperialists, not fighting people who say racist things, not fighting people who say sexist things, not trying to get Republican student organizations banned from your campus, not trying to get Donald Trump impeached because he might be friendly to those evil Russians. No. If you call yourself a Marxist, if you call yourself a socialist, if you call yourself a revolutionary, if you want to identify with Che Guevara, if you want to identify with Ho Chi Minh, if you want to identify with Lenin or Stalin or Mao Zedong, your job is to build a united front against the imperialists. Build an alliance of the working people, the working class of the Western countries, with the people of the colonized world that are struggling for their national liberation. That is what you should be doing. And if you are not doing that, if you're doing the opposite, if you're doing the dirty work of the imperialists and pushing Russophobia, if you're doing the dirty work of the imperialists and trying to give their system a woke makeover and make people think the USA is woke and progressive now, if you're doing the dirty work of the imperialists and trying to beat down the so-called new right opposition and protect the imperialists from the right opposition that they face, if you are doing the dirty work of the imperialists and trying to demonize Russia and China, if you're doing the dirty work of the imperialists and trying to convince us that it's our job to have more censorship on the internet, to give the imperialists more of a monopoly to spread their propaganda, if you are doing the dirty work of the imperialists, you are not a socialist. You are not a communist. You are not a revolutionary. You're not. I'm sorry. If you are helping the imperialists, if your goal is to help protect the imperialists from the right wing or from the Russians or from the Chinese or from confused working people who aren't on board with all the, fancy woke words you learned at NYU, you're not a revolutionary. A revolutionary's job is to build an alliance of the working people in the Western countries with the colonized people around the world in their fight for national liberation. That is your job. And if you are not doing that, you are not a revolutionary. You are not a communist. You are not a socialist. I don't care what you think about Lenin or Trotsky or Ho Chi Minh. I'm not here to have a theoretical and ideological debate with you. I am here to tell you what it is you should be doing, not what you should be believing, not what theories you should develop. That if you are fighting the imperialists, you are my comrade. And if you are protecting the imperialists, you are not my comrade. And that is how it works. That is how it works. Our job is to stand against the imperialists, to unite against the imperialists. That is our job, folks. That is our job. unite against the imperialists, to stand against the imperialists. I repeat myself and I repeat myself and I yell until I'm blue in the face, but it must be said. Our job is to stand against imperialism. Imperialism. That is our job. Stand against the imperialists. Build an alliance of the working class of the Western countries with the people of the colonized world. Stand against the imperialists. Defeat the imperialists. Defeat Jeff Bezos. Defeat ExxonMobil. Defeat Shell Oil. Defeat the Pentagon. Defeat Wall Street. That is our job, folks. That is our job, is to defeat the imperialists, not to defeat people who are wrong, not to defeat people who are confused, not to help the imperialists, to defeat the imperialists. You should be waking up every day and saying, what am I doing today to fight the imperialists? What have I done today to help the hungry people of Vermont and Illinois and Kentucky? And what have I done today to help the people of Iran? What have I done today to help the people of Venezuela? What have I done today to help the people of Russia and of China? What have I done today to help the people of Ohio and Pennsylvania? What have I done today to stand up to the imperialists? That is the question. What have you done to challenge the imperialists? Because imperialism is the issue. The ultra monopolistic corporations, the Silicon Valley elite, Walmart, Jeff Bezos at Amazon, BP, Shell, Chevron, ExxonMobil, Goldman Sachs, Chase Bank, the Rockefellers, the Carnegies, the DuPonts, the ultra monopolists that sit at the center of a global financial empire. These are the imperialists. Imperialism is capitalism in its monopoly stage, a global financial system that is driving the world into poverty in order to keep a few ultra-rich corporations wealthy. That is our job. That is our job. That is our job, folks. That is our job. That is our job. Writing it down. That is our job. That's our job. That is our job. That is our job. And if you look at the history of Marxism in the 20th century, if you read what Mao Zedong wrote in the Little Red Book, if you read what was put out by Ho Chi Minh, by Lenin, by Che Guevara, if you read what Malcolm X wrote, if you read what Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. wrote in the final years of his life, in his Beyond Vietnam speech, this is our job. This is what we should be doing, to stand against the imperialists. Stand against the imperialists. Stand against the imperialists. That is what all of humanity is up against. They are up against the imperialists. There you go. And that is the point that I wanted to make in my opening remarks. It may seem like a simple point. It may seem like an ultra complex point, no matter how you look at it. But ultimately, when I talk about Joe Biden being the starvation president, we talk about all the people that are losing their homes and jobs and facing these high gas prices. When we talk about this ugly war in Ukraine that the imperialists are determined to keep going, they will not allow there to be a peace deal. When we talk about the hunger crisis facing the world, when we talk about the threat of a new war against China and how they're doing everything they can to escalate tensions with China, that's the issue here. It's all about imperialism. Imperialism, the highest stage of capitalism, as Vladimir Lenin explained. That's what we're up against, folks. That is what we are up against. That's what we are up against. And we are going to unite against the imperialists. And we are going to oppose the global financial system, capitalism in its monopoly stage. And that's what we're going to do.